You are listening to the Archaeology Podcast Network.
The Archaeology Podcast Network is sponsored by Codify, a California benefit corporation. Visit Codify at www.codifi.com.
Welcome to Heritage Voices, episode 4.1, bonus episode. I'm today's host, Jessica Uquinto.
Today I'm talking to Tina Stege and Dr. Jenny Newell about preserving cultural heritage in the face of climate change. So today is a bonus episode. It's a follow-up to a previous episode I did with Tina Stege on climate change and nuclear legacy in the Marshall Islands.
If you haven't checked out that episode, which is episode 4,
it's a good overview of the topics that we're going to cover today, and it would be a good one to check out before diving into this one. So briefly, for those of you who missed it, Tina Stege is an anthropologist from the Marshall Islands whose work predominantly focuses on both climate change and getting the U.S. to recognize and assist the Marshall Islands with the effects of the nuclear bombs they dropped as tests on some of the islands in the 1950s. So welcome back, Tina.
Hi, it's glad to be back. Thanks, Jessica.
All right, and on this episode, we are also lucky to have Dr. Jenny Newell. She is currently the collection co-manager of the Pacific Collection at the Australian Museum, Sydney. She received her PhD at the Australian National University from the History Department and the Center for Cross-Cultural Research. She previously served as the curator of Pacific ethnography at the American Museum of Natural History, an assistant curator at the British Museum, and a research fellow at the National Museum of Australia. Her interests focus on material culture and the relationship between Pacific Islanders and their environments. She recently co-edited Curating the Future, Museums, Communities, and Climate Change, which is available through the Routledge Press. Thanks for being here today, Jenny.
Thanks very much. It's great to be with you.
All right, so since we spent the beginning of the last episode getting to know Tina a little bit, let's get to know you, Jenny, a little bit. So what got you interested in this kind of work? Did you just go to a museum one day when you were a kid and say, done, this is it?
I guess I've always been really interested in the relationships of people and environment. That's always been something that's very close to my heart. At university, I was really wanting to learn more about the Pacific, which is this wonderful area right next to Australia, which we knew almost nothing about when I was going through school. It wasn't introduced to students very much as a region, and so I felt very curious about this place, which I'm sure, I was very sure there was going to be a lot of fascinating and wonderful cultures there, and I was right. So I've had a wonderful time exploring the Pacific and really loving the way that people are so intimately interconnected with their environment, and I was very warmly welcomed into the places that I visited in the Pacific, and so I sort of really fell in love with the opportunities that I was given there and with the places and the people there.
So just curious, did you get the chance to travel much when you were a kid or before you went to university, or did this really develop when you were at university and later?
I did travel once to Sri Lanka with my family when we were adopting my sister, and that was a formative experience for me, and I guess I really have remained fascinated by other cultures and other ways of being in the world and other ways of understanding the world since then. And I guess that really got me started.
Nice. So I know you've worked on quite a few projects throughout the Pacific. Could you highlight some of the collaborative efforts that you've worked on throughout the years?
Yes, I've had wonderful collaborations. Primarily, my most wonderful favorite one has been working with Tina. I've also had the great opportunity to work with many different groups in London and in New York. In London, I was able to work with Ngati Ranana, the London Maori community, and we worked on various exhibition programs and a whole range of different things there. And in New York, we've had a lot of support at the museum through Hawaii, the Hawaiian community there, and lots of projects we've worked on together. And we've had Pacific Open House sessions at the museum, and had joint projects around the arrival of Hokulea, the voyaging canoe, and those sorts of collaborations which help to bring Pacific cultures to a broader audience. I think it has been very rewarding.
So one question that I'm personally curious about, Tina had mentioned before that you had done some repatriation work with the Maori, sending cultural items, I believe, back to them. And just curious, because you were working in the U.S. at that point, whether you had much of a sense or an experience on how that kind of work or that kind of work with groups in the Pacific, or starting from, the Australian Museum, for example, how that differs from, for example, NAGPRA. I don't know if you.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, I guess the way it stands in the US is that, through NAGPRA, there's a very formal and organized way of returning ancestral remains to communities, whereas the rest of the world falls into a much more amorphous and sort of ambiguous category. And so that kind of, that just means that there's no program of actually contacting communities and saying that we have some of your ancestors in this institution. The way it's worked is that it's dealt with on a case-by-case basis. And so when the Te Papa Tongarewa group, who were mandated to organise repatriations on behalf of the whole of Aotearoa, New Zealand, when they approached us, we were able to just look at that request and deal with that request on a sort of, a fairly just looking at that particular case and dealing with it in the way that we felt best. And it went very smoothly, and I was very pleased that it was such a pretty much straightforward process to work with them to ensure that those tupuna were returned to their homeland.
Nice. So what do you think about this project or some of the other projects that you've worked on? What do you think has made them particularly successful?
So I guess some of the really successful aspects of the projects that I've worked on with Tina around the Marshall Islands has been the extent to which Tina's been prepared to share so much with me, and that I've been able to, that Tina's really been able to introduce me to so many of the depths and the complexities of what's going on in the contemporary Marshall Islands, but also some of the sort of the longer term traditions and histories that have led up to where the Marshall Islands are today. And I guess we have a lot. Sorry, my voice is not cooperating today.
You're good. Is Tina still there, by the way?
I'm here.
Okay.
That's great.
Okay. No, just because my screen,
I didn't want.
it looked like it got hung up on you or something for a second.
No, I'm here.
Okay.
I was wondering when
sorry.
I had to stop Jenny from. Well, I had to jump in and say how much Jenny brings to this.
Oh, sure. Well, you go for it. I was just going to say that. No, you go for it.
No. Go ahead. Finish.
I was going to say, I think Tina and I have so many interests in common that it's just a huge pleasure working with Tina, and that we both have got the same aims in wanting to really broaden understandings and care for the Marshall Islands in the broader community, not just in the States but internationally. And so I guess we're both working to that same aim. Therefore, it's just a great pleasure to work together, and I think we can make quite a lot of headway because of that.
Yeah, and I would, yeah. I think at the base of it, Jenny and I just have so much fun. So that makes it all really it's maybe we shouldn't be having so much fun, but I actually think that that's what makes it so meaningful in a way, because yes, we have a lot of the same aims, and I learned so much too. I mean, I really hadn't had much experience or contact with museum work before starting to work with Jenny. And it's funny because I had, on a personal level, been to that museum, the American Museum of Natural History, so much in the years prior to meeting Jenny, because I had young children and I lived 10 blocks away. And, I would go there not every week, but almost nearly every week. And I actually never went to the Pacific Islands section in the museum because it's pretty outdated and it didn't speak to me. And so it wasn't until after meeting Jenny that I really realized how much museums had to offer for Indigenous communities on a much more personal level, both, but just that there are all those treasures in there, and it's just a matter of opening them up for people like me, and for communities. And I think that was what Jenny did that hadn't been I hadn't seen that happening at that particular museum, and she came on and she just really like lit a fire, and all of a sudden there are all these Pacific Islanders in the museum and doing work or attending talks or giving talks, and it all of a sudden became more of a living museum. Or in my head it went from a museum like I thought of museums in the West to, I guess, more of just sort of a place that was alive. And I think that was really exciting. And so the collaboration, I've learned so much, and it's made me just excited to be around museums and to think about all the things that they can do, and particularly in this time.
Yeah,
Thank
and
you,
that's
Tina. One of the nicest things anyone's ever said about me and my work. Thank you. So lovely. Wow. Very lovely.
That is something that I would really like to dive into a little bit more. That what you said right there was, basically the museum exhibit being outdated and not speaking to you, and then that transition to having it come alive and be a place where you really felt at home. What do you think it was specifically that made that change happen? I mean, obviously Jenny, but like, what did Jenny do that you felt like really?
Well, there were so many different pieces. It wasn't just one thing. There were several things. She started, I think, I forget what you called them, Jenny, the sort of Pacific Islander nights. It was almost like
open days, yeah.
Open days where people in the Pacific Island community would be invited to the museum after hours to talk to each other and to be in the Pacific Hall. That, I think, that was sort of a beginning. But then there were so many other things inviting me to go back into the archives and see objects that weren't on display out in the front, and realize really how many things were back there that were just, these treasures that I hadn't ever seen. And not just me. I mean, people coming in from the Marshalls, making sure that people who were here for UN meetings or for whatever reason would have that chance to go into the archives. And by the way, it's not an easy thing. You have to get all of these permissions to get into those archives. Like Jenny had to go through bureaucracy to make sure that we could go see our things, but
Right.
she did it, and that was huge. Then one of the very last things before she left, she opened an exhibit that showcases. It's in the Pacific Hall, so the Pacific Hall is still there. It's still pretty outdated. They haven't updated that hall, and I'm not sure how many decades. But Jenny was able to put in a new case, and the case showcases contemporary Pacific art and climate change related narratives. And I think it's a shot of, I guess, the contemporary and what's happening today into a hall that is pretty outdated. So those are just
and Tina was one of the people who contributed to that case, and so it's been great being able to bring some Pacific Islander voices into that hall. So Tina and others.
Other Pacific Islanders who participated in that. So it's a whole I don't know how Jenny did it. I mean, she just she did so many things, but all those things together really brought that place alive, I think.
Or with a little help from my friends.
That, I mean, it's amazing how much these stories remain true in different places and in different times. So, for example, the interview that I did with the Grand Canyon Tribal Program Manager, she's touching on a lot of these really similar themes. And one thing that the two, like you're talking and her interview that they really touch on for me, you're talking about the museum exhibit being outdated. And I know that in the Southwest, for example, when museum exhibits are outdated, they'll talk about things like places being abandoned. So there are ancestral places for the tribes around here, and they'll say, oh, this was abandoned in this year. And the tribes really they don't like that because it basically implies a disconnect, or that these places aren't still important to them culturally. So I'm curious for the Pacific, if there's, when you say outdated, if there's specific things that you want to make sure that people know versus the more outdated narratives.
Definitely. I mean, I think, Tina, you might want to comment on that as well. I guess my my great sort of challenge with that hall, the Margaret Mead Hall of Pacific Peoples, that was first opened in the 70s and then reopened a bit later on in the 80s, was to try and do all those things that Tina was mentioning, and try to bring that space to life and try to bring some sense of ongoing, continuing peoples and ongoing, continuing creativity, and some sense of what the current issues are for people in the Pacific, instead of always just presenting these rather static and very historic views of those many different Pacific peoples in this sort of very caught within a glass case kind of way. I mean, it's a hall that doesn't allow any of that vibrancy or creativity or change to come to the fore, and that's what we were trying to do with this case that we curated with a wonderful team of museum anthropology students at Columbia University, along with some of our great advisors from the Pacific. So we were hoping to just be able to make some of those great absences and silences that are there now in the hall sort of to be embroidered and to allowed to speak a bit more. So we wanted to be able to do that with that new case, and hopefully in time that's the sort of revitalization that we'll be able to do in other parts of the hall. We are doing. The museum is still continuing with putting in some new labels and new photographs and a few things like that, which will help. But over time, we could hope there'll be a new Pacific curator there, and then that new person will continue with that process.
Nice. All right, so we are at a break point. So we're going to be back in a few moments.
Let's face it, the quality of archaeological field photography could really use some improvement. We aim to change this with the Codify Magic Photo Board. This lightweight but incredibly durable board is designed to help you take color-perfect photos of artifacts, features, and sites using almost any camera, even your smartphone. You need to see it to believe it. Engineered from exceptional quality, color-safe, high-pressure laminate, Codify Magic Photo Board is ready for tough field conditions. It's guaranteed to level up your photography. Start taking publication-worthy photos right in the field with the Codify Magic Photo Board. Available now for pre-order, visit codify.com/APN. That's codifi.com/APN today and get your promo code exclusively for listeners of the Archaeology Podcast Network.
All right, and we are back. So all of this talk that we're having about the American Museum of Natural History makes me curious. I know you just got to the Australian Museum, but are there any big efforts that you want to push in your work there, Jenny?
Here at the Australian Museum, many big efforts. We've got a really exciting program here. The Australian Museum is very keen to become kind of like a leader in the field of engaging with Pacific cultures and helping the broader community understand Pacific cultures more fully, become a leader in research in the Pacific, and particularly around Pacific collections, and also particularly around climate change. So it's a really exciting phase to be here. We're wanting to set up a new research centre and open up ways to facilitate Pacific Islanders coming to do research and residencies here at the museum, and all sorts of exciting commissions and new purchases of artworks and all sorts of great things. So we're really looking forward to this new phase. And I'm the co-manager of the Pacific collection here, along with Michael Mell, who's from Goroka, and it's wonderful to be able to be working with Michael, and we're enjoying the partnership and bringing our very different experiences and backgrounds on the Pacific to our work here. And he's really into performance art and other issues to do with people and environment. So we're really working closely together on all of that.
Yeah,
it's a great place to be. There's such a big Pacific community here, and there's so many people from across the Pacific. It's just really, really great place for me to be. So, and I know Michael's enjoying it too.
Yeah, I'm sure it must be nice to be back home too.
It is. It's great. And it's wonderful to be back with our family here. And we do miss our New York friends. Miss Tina.
Yeah.
Yes, we moved onto the block where Jenny lived, and then she left a month later.
Oh.
But now we'll just get a chance to go visit her in Australia, and hopefully in the dead of winter sometime that will.
That's right.
Yes.
Go to Australia.
Yeah, we need you over here.
Well, that sounds lovely. Okay. So, would the two of you mind talking a little bit more then about your work together? How the two of you, I mean, it sounds like you started working together through the American Museum of Natural History, but how that collaboration really developed and what has made it successful.
Well, I think as Tina said before, it's because we're such great friends and we just love being together and doing lots of things together. So that's kind of how it's developed so well. And I guess we worked together initially on it was like a community project to link people in New York to people in Samoa after Hurricane Sandy and after Cyclone Evan, and comparing experiences that people had after those major storm events and how people were recovering and what sort of impact that was having on people's connections to home. And that was really powerful kind of set of workshops and discussions and conversations, and there's a little book coming out of that. And I guess through that one, you might agree, Tina, that sort of we sort of went from there and decided that we really liked working together, and that we had other things we wanted to do as well around the Marshalls particularly. So I guess that's where we went with that. And then a project opportunity came up through the American Museum of Natural History as a really wonderful family that supports research in remote places throughout the world. It's the Niarchos family. So through a Niarchos Foundation grant, Tina and I and our colleague Sergio Herrero de la Torre were able to set up a project to work on climate change in the Marshall Islands. And we had some wonderful collaborators in the Marshalls, Tina's brother, Mark, and also Kathy Jetnal-Kishner. So you might want to add something there, Tina, about that project, because it was primarily your design. I think that we worked together on it, but it was your idea about looking at action in the face of climate change challenges that really drove the design of that project.
Yeah, well, the idea was to be on the ground and see what communities were doing. And at that point, when we sort of were putting this project together, there had been quite a lot in the news about the Marshalls. It was one of the Pacific poster children. I sort of think of it like that, where, the Marshalls and Tuvalu and Kiribati, you get these stories, and there's just this rash of journalists going out and talking about how the seas were rising and important things, but not necessarily people who had time to really be there and understand the sort of real complications of it all. And behind people's choices to whether it was to stay or to go, or to build a seawall or to plant plants. All those things is, I thought, were being missed. And
Definitely.
yeah, so we got this grant, and it allowed us to go out, and I was able to go out for almost 6 weeks, and then Jenny and Sergio came out for a week and a month. I think Sergio was there for a month, and Jenny was there for a couple of weeks. We ended up
I was there a couple
spending,
of weeks, that's right.
yeah, and we were able to spend time both in Madro, which is the center, where the center of the government, where a lot of there's sort of a lot of action in Madro. And then, but we were also, I think, just as importantly, able to spend a week on one of the outer islands. So we took a flight out to Namaruk Atoll, and it's a place where there's a flight once a week, and it's very small, a few hundred people, not anymore. It's also a place where I knew that a lot of work had been done around climate change at the community level. And one of our collaborators was actually now Minister Matlin Zachris, but he's the senator for that atoll. And he's a colleague from a long time. He's been a colleague for a long time, and he's done a ton of work with his community, and his mayor is amazing, and they've just been doing the day-to-day stuff with their community to try to figure out how to respond to some of the effects of climate change. And I wanted to capture that story, and not just for the outside world, but for Marshallese themselves. The idea that we may not necessarily understand how much resilience we have, or how much strength we have, or the things that we can do. That things are happening maybe on one atoll that people on another don't know, and trying to make connections within our communities, because connections are what make us stronger, as a country, as a people. So that was sort of the idea behind it all, and we had a great time. I had a great time.
We did. It was wonderful.
Yeah,
it was a very, very special time. Yeah, it was. I learned so much. It was just incredible and a great honor to be able to be welcomed into those communities, and for people to just sit and talk to us. And it was one of those things where it couldn't have happened without Tina and Mark and Kathy, but really the way that Sergio and I, who don't speak Marshallese, were able to just come in and really feel that we were understanding a lot of what people are experiencing and what they're doing about it. It was just really heartening, actually, because we're so often surrounded by the stories of the doom and gloom, and how terrible things are, and how much people are being affected in these really tragic ways by the impacts of climate change. And then to hear all the ways that people are just like really standing up and joining hands and fighting this and finding ways forward and staying positive and really working together. It's very inspiring. I think there's a lot of really strong messages there from what we were hearing to take back to communities around the world, actually, who, if they're not dealing with major impacts from climate change, are going to be dealing with them before too long. I think there's a lot to learn from the Marshall Islands.
Right. Yeah, you mentioned before we started the call about a couple different types of findings that you guys were gathering from this conversation, or from this project, and resilience and strength definitely being a huge one. Did you want to touch a little bit more on some of your specific findings?
Yeah, do you want to speak to that, Tina, first?
No, you go ahead.
Okay, I think Tina knows this all very intimately, but for me, what really struck me as an outsider coming in was seeing the, I guess, like the cultural resources that are there in the Marshalls, and every place has its own set of cultural resources for dealing with disaster or ongoing difficulties or changes. And in the Marshall Islands, it's really this sense of, it's called Laledron. Am I saying that right, Tina?
Laleron. Yeah.
Thank you.
Lale.
And that's working together and caring for each other. And this is an idea that's common in many parts of the Pacific, and there's always a local word to sum it up. And it's this way that everyone supports each other. So when there's a drought, people's water tanks might have been running dry, but their neighbour would still have water, and so of course they were fine because they still had water from their neighbour. If someone's lost their breadfruit trees or their banana crops their banana trees to a flood or to the slowly encroaching seawater, there's always going to be a neighbour who has some breadfruit and bananas that they can share with them. I guess going forward, that's going to be harder when everyone perhaps will have lost their crops. But there's always going to be a broader network beyond the immediate island and beyond the immediate community where people can draw on other people in other places across the Marshalls and also get help from the broader network of family and friends out across the world, mostly across the states. So there's sort of a sense of a broad network that people can rely on. So even though they're not really networked in electronic ways or in sort of in terms of good transport links, there's other ways that people are linked with these strong bonds between people, and that they're still effective bonds and really important bonds they're enacted, even though they're not able to be enacted through communications or transport necessarily. It's sort of there's other ways that people are able to get those kinds of support networks working for them. I think the Marshall Islands have always been seen as being very effective in terms of climate change activism and getting their voice heard on the international arena. And that's certainly, it's been incredibly impressive, the ways that Tony de Brum and the others, Hilda Heine, of course, the new Prime Minister, have all been so effective at really presenting the Marshall Islands case and really raising awareness around the world in the international forum about the impacts of climate change in the Pacific. And the thing that we were really looking at is that effectiveness on the international stage, is that also working on the local level? Are the links, the communication links, are they working effectively in the Marshalls themselves, between islands and within islands? And it's particularly that link between people who are able to affect change or get funding in Majuro, in the centre, and then out to the outer islands. And we did find that there were some places where those links could be strengthened. And so we had a workshop that was really bringing people together to share those kinds of problems, or where people were identifying gaps and looking for ways of closing those gaps up. That I think worked really well, as it was a good first step.
That's interesting. Tina, did you have any more that you wanted to add to all that?
Well, one thing I would add that came up a lot when we were there, maybe this isn't necessarily, I think it is a part of resilience in the sense that it was something that people were proud of and they felt that represented progress in their community. And so there's a pearl farm that had been started, I would say in the mid-2000s in the Marshall, well, not in Namruk Atoll. And it's the only atoll at the moment which is producing pearls. There had been pearl farms in other atolls, but for various different reasons, they have shut down. But this one is continuing to produce, and it's had a lot of funding support from outside, and the links for that funding support have been really through, I think, the mayor and the senator have been able to sort of get funding. It's a pretty capital intensive kind of thing to start a pearl farm. And it takes several years for it to show any return. And there were quite a few of the people that we talked to who, we sort of asked the question, what do you think the future looks like? And they would say, well, there's great, there's good things happening here. There's a, and then they would mention the pearl farm. So going to Jenny's point, this it's not people are there, and there are things happening there that people are proud of, and they love where they live. And for lots of different reasons, and not just because it's the traditional place where they have ties to the land. That is true. I think people love it for that reason, but they also like it for new things, new developments, exciting signs of the way that the community is moving forward. So I think that also shows it's a vibrant community. And we wanted to celebrate that, I guess. I always want to celebrate that.
Yes. Definitely. Yes.
So I guess the natural next question from that then is, how do we take that vibrant community and adjust it to a post-climate change world? Is there a way to
question.
Yeah. Right?
Yeah.
I guess we'll never have a post-climate change world. Unfortunately, we're always going to be living in it. But once it gets really difficult for people to support themselves, to be able to grow enough food and have enough fresh water in their home places, and people do have to think about moving. I think it's really interesting that in the Marshall Islands, people already have a sense of where they might go, or not necessarily think about themselves as moving, because not everyone has thought that along those lines, but that people have a sense of themselves being connected to Arkansas or Hawaii or other places because their children are there or their cousins there, or they've got broader networks, and so there's already sort of places where they have a bit of belonging. And I don't know if that's necessarily the case in some of the other atoll communities across the Pacific. There's not necessarily places where people can really obviously move to. So it depends a lot on that kind of context and the sort of the basic logistics of being able to move between countries. The Compact of Free Association with the states makes a big difference, and that's it's going to have a lot of impact in terms of shaping what the future looks like for Marshall Islanders.
And I think can you explain real quick for those people that may not know what that is, what the Compact of, you said, Free Association is?
Yeah. So Tina, do you want to do that?
Yeah, I think so. The Compact of Free Association is an agreement that regulates the relationship between the U.S. and the Marshall Islands. We were a trust territory of the United States, or administered by the United States, until 1986, which is when this compact went into effect. And it does a bunch of things, but some of the sort of major things is that the U.S. has basically defense rights over the Marshall Islands. So there's actually a military base there. We have political independence, and we also, Marshallese, are able to enter the United States without a visa. So we can move to the United States on a Marshall Islands passport, and we can live, work, or go to school in the United States, I guess, indefinitely. You're not a citizen. In fact, we're classified as a non-immigrant. But it means that many of our folks have moved to the U.S. We have a huge community in Hawaii, for us, a huge community in Arkansas, and also now more and more in the Northwest. And in all these sorts of places where you would never expect Marshallese to be, there are Marshallese there. And in fact, when we were on that outer island, Namajuk, pretty much everybody we talked to had several relatives, sons or daughters or fathers or mothers who were living in the United States, and that they very much, like Jenny was saying, felt connected to those people. And when we asked what would you do in terms of disasters, they said, well, we also depend on people, our family who live abroad for help. So
Okay, so we're going to take our final break real quick, and then when we get back, we will just jump right into it.
Women in Archaeology is a show about archaeology by the women of archaeology. An alternating panel of women archaeologists discuss the issues in archaeology that impact professionals and the public every day. Check out Women in Archaeology for a different perspective on the past today at www.archaeologypodcastnetwork.com/WIA. Now let's get back to the show.
Well, and that brings me to a question that I don't know if people have started talking about this or if there is an answer at all to this, but right now, the Marshall Islands obviously is a sovereign nation, and if the Marshall Islands become uninhabitable, what happens to that political entity? I mean, you are a people with a sovereign government. Does that is there any sort of transition there, or I mean, do you become basically a stateless government? Has there been any sort of discussion about what happens there?
There's actually a book where several legal scholars have weighed in on this. And I forget the name of the book right now, but it's Michael Gerard is the main editor of it. And he's at Columbia, and they actually did a symposium just thinking about this question. The RMI government was one of the sponsors of that symposium. I don't know that there is no answer. As far as I know, there's no answer as yet. But there's a lot of theoretical answers, theoretical hypotheses. What might happen.
Right. So I know that Jenny's going to have to cut out after not too long, so I want to make sure that we get to the book. So Jenny, could you introduce your book and give us a basic overview?
Sure. So, Curating the Future, Museums, Communities and Climate Change is an edited volume, and I edited it with Kirsten Weiner of the National Museum of Australia and Libby Robin, who's also at that museum, and the Australian National University. And we were really keen to bring together many different voices from around the world to think through, to talk about, discuss what it is that museums can do to help people to engage with the issues of climate change and to take action on those issues. Museums are really great places for doing that, and they're ideally suited for people to come in and sort of stop and slow down and reflect and think through some of these tricky issues. Museums are good for, they're sort of like a slow media. They're places where people stop and expect to be learning a little bit, thinking about things, taking in new ideas, and museums also are really good places for debate, good platforms for debate, and for just sort of encouraging people to rethink the sorts of perhaps more sort of settled ideas they might have. We want to sort of unsettle people and really help them to shake themselves up and move forward. So we brought people together for a symposium to begin with. That was in 2013, and Tina was there. And we brought people from the Pacific, from communities that are already dealing with climate change, people who work in museums there in the Pacific, and people who work either as curators or historians or designers, exhibition designers, and many other people, artists who've been engaging with climate change in lots of different ways. And we had this really great few days of thinking through effective ways of getting these messages out and encouraging engagement in those issues. And out of those great conversations, we put together a book. And so a lot of it is, we had a lot of contributors from the American Museum of Natural History. They all spoke about a specific instance, a particular exhibition or a particular collection that really helped to advance those sorts of ideas. And then also we had people talk about sort of the broader issues about how museums can be effective in the sort of the more ethical and moral position that, on that, there's sort of the moral obligation of museums to really help people come to grips with this new climate change era that we're in. And Tina was wonderful and agreed to come in and spend some time with the Marshall Islands collection, and she chose a piece and then wrote about it. Perhaps you could tell us a bit about that, Tina.
Oh, so I ended up writing about a jaguar, which is a mat that traditionally was used for clothing. It's very finely woven, and it actually, that type of weaving, that skill had almost entirely died out in the Marshalls. I mean, Western clothes came in and it was just so much more convenient, and people had been wearing those. So we weren't making this kind of work, took a lot of time. So people definitely kept weaving, but not this particular type of weaving. And then it was revived, I think about 10 years ago now. So the last few master weavers have now taught a new generation of weavers this skill. The interesting thing is that most jaguar are in museums. We don't have them in the Marshalls. They didn't survive. And so there are very, very few examples of jaguar for this new generation to actually look at and see and work off of. And yet in museums all over the world there are jaguar mats that have been preserved. And so I was very, very fortunate to be able to go in and spend time with mats at the American Museum of Natural History, and I ended up choosing one. And the piece I wrote for the book is really short, but it was a really special experience for me, because one, I had never written about an object in that way, so that was just really fun for me. But also it brought back for me all these memories because my grandmother was a weaver. And so, I live away from home, and I've lived away from home for a long time, and, I miss my home. And so it was really special for me to be able to be at this museum, in New York City and feel connected back to my grandmother and place I grew up and my family who are all still there. So it ended up being really, really special. And like I said, it's a very short piece, but it's very close to my heart.
It's really evocative, and I love the way you bring in all the sensory aspects of that object, the way it smells and how that reminds you of the smell of the pandanus when you were with your grandmother, and the way it feels. And it's really a wonderful example of the kinds of importances that are around those collections, the kinds of value, the way that those collections can be a little bit of home for people who are away from home. And I guess museums will become increasingly important in that way, sadly, as more and more people end up needing to leave home.
Right. Are there proactive things that museums can do now before these places are uninhabitable to make sure that's there for future generations?
Do you mean like collecting from those places particularly? Is that the sort of thing you mean? Or I guess proactively we're doing exhibitions and and helping people feel connected to museums and making sure we're opening doors much more, because traditionally museums have been very closed door institutions. It's I think it's important to do that kind of work now. But in terms of collections, I suppose we're often guided by what people want to donate to the institution, rather than necessarily being able to afford to do a really extensive collecting program. And often commissioning things from artists is a wonderful thing to do, but also quite expensive. So it's tricky to necessarily have a concerted program of ensuring that there's cultural patrimony from every place in a museum. I mean, there are often very good historic collections, but yeah. Sorry, Tina.
Well, one thing that the museum has done in this case was they put all those objects, they photograph them, and you can now view them online. And that's really important for like in the Marshalls, where I said, we don't have those mats anymore. You can actually go online now and at least see them. It's the best case scenario is to actually be in the same room. But,
Right.
if that can't happen, at the very least, if you can access the objects through technology, then that's really important too.
Mm-hmm.
That's true.
I think just it's that accessibility is so important.
Right. Or I was also even thinking along the lines of more of storytelling type projects, like videoing elders in certain places talking about what the different places in the islands mean to them, or what they mean culturally, things like that. Is there any efforts to do
I guess
that kind of work?
that's a little bit of what Tina and I were doing with Sergio in the Marshalls. But yes, certainly there are other projects like that going on, and I'm certainly keen to advance those kinds of recordings, and really get stories are so important, and those ways of capturing and sharing the those histories and ongoing values in those places. That's true.
Right.
It's very important.
Right. Yeah, or I'm even thinking like some of the work that we're really interested in doing is mapping projects. So going out with youth and elders, and having recorders and GIS, and basically creating a cultural map of a place, which I could imagine in a place that people soon won't necessarily be able to visit, that could be even more powerful.
That's actually an idea that so my brother, who was also part of the project over the summer, heads up the Marshall Islands Conservation Society, and he's really interested in, and they are doing mapping, and the drone technology is that really is exciting for him, and that cultural mapping, but also just the physical mapping, knowing where everything is, and also that it's from a very practical standpoint really important to know these things, because with sea level rise, you have to know where the highest points are, you have to know where the lowest points are, you have to know what's important in order to know where you can go. So yeah, I think that's very much on the radar back home.
And we should mention that the Marshall Islands Conservation Society, who's running that project and many other really important projects, does accept donations. And Tina, do you want to read out the URL?
Oh, it's atollconservation.org.
And I'll include that in the show notes for anyone that's interested. So there'll be a link there. There'll also be a link to the book as well, so people will easily be able to access both of those.
Great. Wonderful. Thank you, Jessica.
All right. Well, are there any other resources out there that you would recommend for anyone wanting to learn more?
I guess if people are wanting to learn more about the Pacific, and also doing collaborative work in the Pacific, I can recommend reading anything by Paige West. For instance, I could recommend Dispossession in the Environment, Rhetoric and Inequality in Papua New Guinea. A wonderful writer and anthropologist and activist, Paige, and she's written about many of these issues in a really engaging way. You'll love to read her work. And also an important book to think through is Linda Tuhiwai-Smith's Decolonizing Methodologies, Research and Indigenous Peoples. Also, you should always check out 350.org. 350.org Pacific is doing great things. And also would like to direct you to Joe Jiggum, which is the youth climate change activist group that Kathy Jetnell-Kishner and her colleagues are running in the Marshall Islands.
Yes, and we talked about her in the last episode. And 2 of her poems, Tell Them and Dear Matafilipinu, are in the show notes, links to them. And they're beautiful videos, very visually stunning. So definitely worth checking out the video version. But she has agreed very generously as well to let us share the 2 poems within the podcast episodes. So the last episode featured Tell Them, which Tina mentioned really captured a piece of her soul. And then this episode, here in a moment, we're going to be sharing Dear Matafalapenu, which is the poem that Kathy Gentile-Kushner presented for the UN Climate Summit in New York. That went viral in 2014. So thank you again, Kathy, for allowing us to share. Also, be sure to check out the YouTube video in the show notes by the American Museum of Natural History that shows a video of the work that Tina and Jenny are talking about in these episodes. So check it out. It's really great to have the visuals associated with everything they're talking about, and it just adds so much. So if you like this episode, definitely check out and share that video as well.
Great, thank you. It's been a really lovely conversation. Thank you.
So to close out this episode, here is Kathy Gentile-Kushner with Dear Matafalapenu.
Dear Matafalapenu, you are a 7-month-old sunrise of gummy smiles. You are bald as an egg and bald as the Buddha. Your thighs that are thunder, shrieks that are lightning, so excited for bananas, hugs, and our morning walks along the lagoon. Dear Matafalapenu, I want to tell you about that lagoon, that lucid, sleepy lagoon lounging against the sunrise. Men say that one day, that lagoon will devour you. They say it will gnaw at the shoreline, chew at the roots of your breadfruit trees, gulp down rows of your seawalls, and crunch through your island's shattered bones. They say you, your daughter, and your granddaughter too, will wander rootless, with only a passport to call home. Dear Matafalapenu, don't cry. Mommy promises you, no one will come and devour you. No greedy whale of a company sharking through political seas, no backwater bullying of businesses with broken morals, no blindfolded bureaucracies gonna push this mother ocean over the edge. No one's drowning, baby. No one's moving. No one's losing their homeland. No one's gonna become a climate change refugee. Or should I say, no one else. To the Carteret Islanders of Papua New Guinea and to the Taro Islanders of Fiji, I take this moment to apologize to you. We are drawing the line here. Because baby, we are going to fight. Your mommy, daddy, boo-boo, dimma, your country, and your president too, we will all fight. And even though there are those hidden behind platinum titles who like to pretend that we don't exist, that the Marshall Islands, Tuvalu, Kiribati, Maldives, and Typhoon Haiyan in the Philippines, and floods of Pakistan, Algeria, and Colombia, and hurricanes, tidal waves, and earthquakes didn't exist, still, there are those who see us. Hands reaching out, fists raising up, banners unfurling, megaphones booming, and we are canoes blocking coal ships. We are the radiance of solar villages. We are the rich, clean soil of the farmer's past. We are petitions blooming from teenage fingertips. We are families biking, recycling, reusing, engineers dreaming, designing, building, artists painting, dancing, writing. We are spreading the word. And there are thousands out on the street, marching with signs, hand in hand, chanting for change now. They're marching for you, baby. They're marching for us. Because we deserve to do more than just survive. We deserve to thrive. Dear Matafalapenu, you are eyes heavy with drowsy weight. So just close those eyes, baby, and sleep in peace. Because we won't let you down. You'll see.
Listening to the Heritage Voices podcast. You can find show notes at www.archaeologypodcastnetwork.com/Heritage Voices. Please subscribe to the show on iTunes, Stitcher, or the Google Music Store. Also, if you like the show, please share with your friends or write us a review. If you have any questions, comments, or show suggestions, please reach out to me at jessica@livingheritageanthropology.org or you can find me on Facebook through Living Heritage Anthropology or on Twitter at Living Heritage A. As always, thank you to Lyle Belenqua and Jason Nez for their collaboration on our incredible logo.
This show is produced by Chris Webster and Tristan Boyle, and edited by Chris Sims.
This has been a presentation of the Archaeology Podcast Network. Visit us on the web for show notes and other podcasts at www.archaeologypodcastnetwork.com. Contact us at chris@archaeologypodcastnetwork.com.
Thanks again for listening to this episode and for supporting the Archaeology Podcast Network. If you want these shows to keep going, consider becoming a member for just $7.99 US a month. That's cheaper than a venti quad eggnog latte. Go to arcpodnet.com/members for more info.